John 3:16 is one of the most quoted verses in the Bible. But because it is quoted so often by itself, many people read it without the conversation, without the Old Testament reference, without the language, and without the symbolism that leads into it. The verse says, "For God so loved the world, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life." Most people immediately focus on two words, world and whosoever. But before we define those words, we have to ask a more basic question. Who is Jesus talking to? The conversation begins in John 3:1-2. The text says there was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews. He came to Jesus by night and said, "Rabbi, we know that thou art a teacher come from God." So the setting is not a random public speech to every nation. It is a nighttime conversation between Jesus and Nicodemus, a Jewish ruler. That matters because Nicodemus is supposed to understand Israel's scriptures, Israel's history, and Israel's symbols. This is why, before John 3:16, Jesus points Nicodemus backward into the Torah. In John 3:14, Jesus says, "As Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up." That sentence is the key to the whole passage. Jesus is not introducing John 3:16 out of nowhere. He is explaining it through Numbers 21:6-9. In Numbers 21, the children of Israel are in the wilderness. They complain against the Lord and against Moses. Then fiery serpents come among the people, and many Israelites die. The people confess that they sinned. Moses prays for them, and the Lord commands Moses to make a fiery serpent and set it on a pole. The instruction is specific. Everyone who is bitten, when he looks at the serpent, will live. Moses makes a serpent of brass and puts it on a pole. If a serpent had bitten any man, when he beheld the serpent of brass, he lived. So John 3:14 is not just a symbol of general healing. It is an Israelite wilderness event. It is about Israel under judgment, Israel bitten, Israel needing deliverance, and Israel looking upon the lifted up sign in order to live. That is the immediate symbolic context of John 3:16. The Son of Man being lifted up is being compared to the brass serpent being lifted up in the wilderness. The original audience in Numbers 21 was Israel. The person Jesus is speaking to in John 3 is a ruler of the Jews. The symbol Jesus uses comes from Israel's national wilderness history. That does not answer every question yet, but it gives us the interpretive frame. Now we can deal with the word world. In Greek, the word translated world in John 3:16 is kosmos. Cosmos can mean the ordered world, the created order, human society, or a particular ordered system of people, depending on context. It does not automatically mean every individual human being without distinction in every verse. Blue Letter Bible's Greek lexicon shows cosmos being used repeatedly in John's writings, and the word has a broad range depending on context. Even in normal Bible reading, we can see that world does not always mean every person on earth. In Luke 2:1, Caesar Augustus decrees that all the world should be taxed. That cannot mean every human being on the planet. It refers to the inhabited Roman world under imperial administration. In John 12:19, the Pharisees say, "Behold, the world is gone after him." That does not mean every person on earth literally followed Jesus. It means the movement around Jesus had spread widely enough that the Pharisees spoke of it as the world. So when we reach John 3:16, we should not assume the English word world settles the matter by itself. We have to ask, which world is being discussed in this context? There is an important Old Testament phrase in Isaiah 45:17. "Israel shall be saved in the Lord with an everlasting salvation. Ye shall not be ashamed nor confounded, world without end." In that passage, world without end is connected directly with Israel's everlasting salvation. The Hebrew idea here is not world as the physical globe. It is tied to duration, continuance, and an everlasting state. This matters because biblical language can use world in more than one way. In Hebrew, one word is eretz, meaning land, earth, country, or ground. Another is tevel, meaning the inhabited world or productive earth. Another is olam, meaning age, eternity, everlasting, or long duration. In Greek, kosmos can refer to order, arrangement, the world, society, or a system. Aion means age or era. Oikumena means the inhabited world, often the known political world, such as the Roman world. So the Bible has multiple words that English sometimes flattens into world. Now let's bring in Wisdom of Solomon 18:24. It says that in the high priest's long garment was the whole world, and in the 4 rows of stones was the glory of the fathers engraved. This is important because the high priest's garment did not literally contain every human being on the planet. The world on the garment is symbolic. It represents an ordered covenant world, and the stones connect directly to the tribes of Israel. That connects with Exodus 39:7, where the stones on the shoulders of the ephod are described as stones for a memorial to the children of Israel. So when Wisdom of Solomon says the whole world was on the priestly garment, the symbolism points to Israel represented before God through the priesthood. This gives us a biblical symbolic category. World can refer to an ordered covenant arrangement, not always the entire globe. John itself gives us another clue. In John 18:19-20, the high priest asks Jesus about his disciples and doctrine. Jesus answers, "I spake openly to the world. I ever taught in the synagogue and in the temple, whither the Jews always resort." Notice how Jesus explains the world in that statement. He connects it to public teaching in the synagogue and the temple, where the Jews always resorted. So in John's own language, world can be used in a way that is bounded by the public Jewish religious setting. Now we can return to John 3:16. When Jesus says God loved the world, we should not begin with a modern assumption. We should read it through John 3's conversation, Numbers 21's Israelite symbol, the priestly world language, and John's own usage. From that angle, the world can be argued as the covenant world of Israel, especially Israel in need of healing, restoration, and life. Now let's deal with the word whosoever. Many people read whosoever as if it automatically means every nation equally without context. But the Bible often uses whosoever inside a defined covenant setting. For example, Joel 2:32 says, "Whosoever shall call on the name of the Lord shall be delivered." But the same verse continues, "For in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem shall be deliverance, as the Lord hath said, and in the remnant whom the Lord shall call." So Joel's whosoever is not floating in empty space. It is connected to Zion, Jerusalem, deliverance, and the remnant whom the Lord calls. Peter quotes this in Acts 2:21. "Whosoever shall call on the name of the Lord shall be saved." But immediately after that, in Acts 2:22, Peter says, "Ye men of Israel, hear these words." That means Peter applies the whosoever quotation directly to men of Israel standing in front of him. The word whosoever is real, but the audience and prophetic framework define its scope. So in John 3:16, whosoever believeth should not be ripped out of the story. The question is not whether the word is open in grammar. The question is, open to whom inside the passage's covenant and prophetic context? Now we bring in Messiah's mission language. In Matthew 15:24, Jesus says, "I am not sent but unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel." In Matthew 10:5-6, he tells the 12 not to go into the way of the Gentiles, but to go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. In John 11:51-52, John says Jesus would die for that nation, and not for that nation only, but that he should also gather together in one the children of God that were scattered abroad. That language is very important. John does not only say Jesus dies for people generally, he says, that nation. and then he adds the scattered children of God. This matches the idea of Israel not only in the land, but also scattered abroad. So a text-based argument can be made that John 3:16's world refers to God's covenant people in their broader, scattered condition. Not merely Judeans in Jerusalem, but the ordered covenant people who need to be healed, gathered, and given life. This also connects with covenant love language. In Deuteronomy 7:6-8, God says Israel is a holy people, chosen above all people on the face of the earth, and that he set his love upon them. In Amos 3:2, God says, "You only have I known of all the families of the earth." In Psalm 147:19-20, the text says God showed his word to Jacob, his statutes and judgments to Israel, and he hath not dealt so with any nation. These passages do not define John 3:16 by themselves, but they establish the biblical category that God's covenant love is uniquely spoken over Israel. Now let's bring in the symbolism of the worm and the lifted up sign. In Isaiah 41:13-14, God says, "Fear not, thou worm Jacob, and ye men of Israel. I will help thee, and thy Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel." The phrase "worm Jacob" is striking. It is language of weakness, lowliness, and helplessness. But the same passage says the Holy One of Israel will redeem and help. This is where some teachers bring in the crimson or scarlet worm symbolism. Historically, scarlet dye in the ancient biblical world was connected with scale insects. Bodleian University reported that a Middle Bronze Age textile from the Judean desert was dyed using Nicodemus, a scale insect associated with the biblical scarlet worm color. Biblical Archaeology Society also describes the discovery as a 3,800-year-old textile dyed with Nicodemus vermilion, connecting it with biblical scarlet terminology. That gives us a real historical anchor. Scarlet dye from insects was part of the ancient world, and scarlet imagery appears in Israel's tabernacle and priestly materials. But the more detailed teaching tradition about the crimson worm climbing a tree, dying, staining the tree, and turning white should be handled carefully. It is powerful as symbolism, but it should not be presented as equally established as the biblical text itself. Symbolically, however, it connects to Isaiah 1:18. "Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. Though they be red like crimson, they shall be as wool." So the teaching point is this. The lifted up serpent in Numbers 21 shows Israel under judgment looking to the lifted sign and living. The scarlet/crimson imagery shows stain, cleansing, and transformation. Isaiah's worm Jacob language shows Israel in weakness, needing redemption from the Holy One of Israel. When John 3:16 says the Son is given so that the believing one should not perish, but have everlasting life, it comes right after the lifted serpent reference. That means the verse is not detached from Israel's wilderness healing symbol. It is explaining life through a lifted up sign. Now let's summarize the teaching clearly. First, John 3:16 is spoken in a Jewish context to Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews. Second, John 3:14 directly connects the passage to Numbers 21, where Israelites were bitten in the wilderness and had to look at the lifted serpent to live. Third, the word world is kosmos, and kosmos has a broader range than every individual human on Earth. It can refer to an ordered system, society, or world depending on context. Fourth, biblical world language can be covenantal or contextual. Isaiah 45:17 speaks of Israel's everlasting salvation as world without end. Wisdom of Solomon 18:24 symbolically places the whole world on the high priestly garment, which Exodus 39:7 connects to the children of Israel. Fifth, John itself uses world contextually in John 18:20, where Jesus says he spoke openly to the world and then describes synagogue and temple teaching where the Jews always gathered. Sixth, whosoever must also be read in context. Joel 2:32 says, "Whosoever," but connects deliverance with Zion, Jerusalem, and the remnant. Acts 2 quotes that same line and applies it directly to "Ye men of Israel." 7. The mission language of Jesus is Israel-focused. Matthew 15:24 says he was sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Matthew 10:5-6 sends the disciples to the lost sheep of Israel. John 11:51-52 says Jesus dies for that nation and gathers the children of God scattered abroad. So the text-based conclusion is this: John 3:16 does not begin as a detached slogan about every nation equally. It sits inside a conversation with a Jewish ruler, points backward to Israel in the wilderness, uses a lifted-up healing symbol from Numbers 21, and speaks in language that can be read as God loving the covenant world of Israel, including the scattered children of God who must believe, look, and live. The strongest one-line teaching conclusion is, John 3:16's world can be read as God's covenant world of Israel in need of healing and gathering, because the immediate context is Nicodemus, the controlling symbol is Numbers 21, the mission language targets Israel, and John later says Jesus dies for that nation and gathers God's scattered children. The question is not whether John 3:16 is powerful. The question is whether we have been reading it with John's context, Moses' serpent, Israel's symbols, and the language of the text. Because once John 3:14 is restored to the conversation, John 3:16 stops floating by itself. It stands in the wilderness, and Israel is looking up. We thank you for watching, and if you would like to see more content like this, subscribe and hit the notification bell, and you will be notified when content drops or our live classes have started. Shalom.